Did you know that Libya has the largest economy in Africa? In 2022, their GDP was over $700 billion, which is around 6 times the size of the Egyptian economy. And it's home to the most millionaires in Africa, with over 2,000 millionaires living there. But why? Why is the Libyan economy so big? Well, it all has to do with oil. They have the second biggest oil reserve in Africa, with a fast-growing petroleum industry that has an annual revenue of over $60 billion. And while their economy is the biggest in Africa, their wealth is spread pretty evenly across the country. So the average income per person is around $11,000, which is actually higher than the average income in the UK. However, despite all this wealth, 70% of Libyans are still considered poor. And the reason for this is because of their unequal distribution of wealth and high levels of corruption. So what do you think? Is Libya the most developed country in Africa? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. In the phrase, إن الحركات التاريخية هي الحركات الجماهيرية. إن الحركات التاريخية هي الحركات الجماهيرية. Translated in the English edition as, historic movements are mass movements. The word Jamahiriya was derived from Jumhuriya, which is the usual Arabic translation of republic. It was coined by changing the component Jumhur, public, to its plural form, Jamahir, the masses. Thus, it is similar to the term People's Republic. It is often left untranslated in English, with the long-form name thus rendered as Great Socialist People's Libyan Arab Jamahiriya. However, in Hebrew, for instance, Jamahiriya is translated as Kaili, Kehiliya, a word also used to translate the term Commonwealth when referring to the designation of a country. After weathering the 1986 U.S. bombing by the Reagan administration, Gaddafi added the specifier Great, Al-Azama al-Uzma, to the official name of the country, Economy of Libya. The economy of Libya depends primarily on revenues from the petroleum sector, which represents over 95% of export earnings and 60% of GDP. These oil revenues and a small population have given Libya one of the highest nominal per capita GDP in Africa. After 2000, Libya recorded favorable growth rates with an estimated 10.6% growth of GDP in 2010. This development was interrupted by the Libyan civil war, which resulted in contraction of the economy by 62.1% in 2011. After the war, the economy rebounded by 104.5% in 2012. It crashed again following the Second Libyan Civil War. As of 2024, Libya's per capita PPP GDP stands at only 65% of its pre-war level in 2010. Libyan GDP per capita was about $40 in the early 1920s, and it rose to $1,018 by 1967. In 1947 alone, per capita GDP rose by 42%. Economic reforms. Remaking of the economy was parallel with the attempt to remodel political and social institutions. Until the late 1970s, Libya's economy was mixed, with a large role for private enterprise, except in the fields of oil production and distribution, banking, and insurance. But according to Volume 2 of Gaddafi's Green Book, which appeared in 1978, private retail trade, rent, and wages were forms of exploitation that should be abolished. Instead, workers' self-management committees and profit participation partnerships were to function in public and private enterprises. A property law was passed that forbade ownership of more than one private dwelling, and Libyan workers took control of a large number of companies, turning them into state-run enterprises. Retail and wholesale trading operations were replaced by state-owned people's supermarkets, where Libyans in theory could purchase whatever they needed at low prices. By 1981, the state had also restricted access to individual bank accounts to draw upon privately held funds for government projects. The measures created resentment and opposition among the newly dispossessed. The latter joined those already alienated, some of whom had begun to leave the country. By 1982, perhaps 50,000 to 100,000 Libyans had gone abroad. Because many of the emigrants were among the enterprising and better educated Libyans, they represented a significant loss of managerial and technical expertise. The government also built a trans-Sahara water pipeline from major aquifers to both a network of reservoirs and the towns of Tripoli, Sirte, and Benghazi in 2006-2007. It is part of the Great Man-Made River Project, started in 1984. It is pumping large resources of water from the Nubian sandstone aquifer system to both urban populations and new irrigation projects around the country. Libya continued to be plagued with a shortage of skilled labor, which had to be imported along with a broad range of consumer goods, both paid for with petroleum income. The country consistently ranked as the African nation with the highest HDI, standing at 0.755 in 2010, which was 0.041 higher than the next highest African HDI that same year. Gender equality was a major achievement under Gaddafi's rule. According to Lisa Anderson, president of the American University in Cairo and an expert on Libya, said that under Gaddafi more women attended university and had dramatically more employment opportunities than most Arab nations. Wars against Chad and Egypt. As early as 1969, Gaddafi waged a campaign against Chad. Scholar Gerard Prunier claims part of his hostility was apparently because Chadian President François Tombalbaye was Christian. Libya was also involved in a sometimes violent territorial dispute with neighboring Chad over the Ozu Strip, which Libya occupied in 1973. This dispute eventually led to the Libyan invasion of Chad. The prolonged foray of Libyan troops into the Ozu Strip in northern Chad was finally repulsed in 1987, when extensive U.S. and French help to Chadian rebel forces and the government headed by former Defense Minister Hissène Habré finally led to a Chadian victory in the so-called Toyota War. The conflict ended in a ceasefire in 1987. After a judgment of the International Court of Justice on 13th February 1994, Libya withdrew troops from Chad the same year, and the dispute was settled. Libyans heavily opposed this war, considering the fact that thousands of high schoolers were taken out of their schools and were forced into battle by the Gaddafi regime. This left many families confused and worried about their kids who did not return home from school. In 1977, Gaddafi dispatched his military across the border to Egypt, but Egyptian forces fought back in the Egyptian-Libyan War. Both nations agreed to a ceasefire under the mediation of the president of Algeria, Houari Boumediene. Chadian-Libyan War. The Chadian-Libyan War was a series of military campaigns in Chad between 1978 and 1987, fought between Libyan and allied Chadian forces against Chadian groups supported by France, with the occasional involvement of other foreign countries and factions. Libya had been involved in Chad's internal affairs prior to 1978 and before Muammar Gaddafi's rise to power in Libya in 1969, beginning with the extension of the Chadian Civil War to northern Chad in 1968. The conflict was marked by a series of 4 separate Libyan interventions in Chad, taking place in 1978, 1979, 1980, 1981, and 1983-1987. On all of these occasions, Gaddafi had the support of a number of factions participating in the civil war, while Libya's opponents found the support of the French government, which intervened militarily to support the Chadian government in 1978, 1983, and 1986. The pattern of the war delineated itself in 1978, with the Libyans providing armor, artillery, and air support, and their Chadian allies, the infantry, which assumed the bulk of the scouting and fighting. This pattern was radically changed in 1986, towards the end of the war, when most Chadian forces united in opposing the Libyan occupation of northern Chad, with a degree of unity never previously witnessed in Chad. This deprived the Libyan forces of their habitual infantry exactly when they found themselves confronting a mobile army, well provided now by the United States, Zaire, and France with anti-tank and anti-air missiles, thus canceling the Libyan superiority in air and other firepower. What followed was the Toyota War, in which the Libyan forces were routed and expelled from Chad, putting an end to the conflict. Gaddafi initially intended to annex the Aouzou Strip, the northernmost part of Chad, which he claimed as part of Libya on the grounds of an unratified treaty of the colonial period. In 1972, his goals became, in the evaluation of historian Mario Azevedo, the creation of a client state in Libya's underbelly, an Islamic republic modeled after his Jamahiriya that would maintain close ties with Libya and secure his control over the Aouzou Strip, expulsion of the French from the region, and use of Chad as a base to expand his influence in Central Africa. Egyptian-Libyan War. The Egyptian-Libyan War, also known as the Four-Day War, Arabic, Harb al-Ayyam al-Arba'a, was a short border war fought between Libya and Egypt that lasted from 21 to 24 July 1977. The conflict stemmed from a deterioration in relations that had occurred between the two states after Egyptian President Anwar Sadat had rebuffed Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi's entreaties to unify their countries and had pursued a peace settlement with Israel in the aftermath of the Yom Kippur War in 1973. Soon thereafter, Libya began sponsoring dissidents and assassination plots to undermine Sadat, and Egypt responded in kind to weaken Gaddafi. In early 1976, Gaddafi dispatched troops to the Egyptian frontier where they began clashing with border guards. Sadat responded by moving many troops to the area, while the Egyptian General Staff drew up plans for an invasion to depose Gaddafi. Clashes along the border intensified in July 1977. On 21st of July, a Libyan tank battalion raided the town of Salem. The Egyptian forces ambushed it and subsequently launched a large counterattack, conducting airstrikes against Gamal Abdel Nasser Air Base and sending a mechanized force 24 kilometers, 15 miles, into Libyan territory before withdrawing. Over the next 2 days, heavy artillery fire was exchanged across the border, while Egyptian jets and commandos raided Libyan locales. On 24th of July, the Egyptians launched a larger raid against Nasser Air Base and struck Libyan supply depots. Under significant pressure from the United States to end the attacks and attempts from President of Algeria, Hawari Boumediene, and Palestine Liberation Organization leader Yasser Arafat to mediate a solution, Sadat suddenly declared a ceasefire. Sporadic fighting occurred over the next few days as Egyptian troops withdrew across the border. Relations between the two countries remained tense, and, though a formal agreement was never reached, both upheld a truce and gradually withdrew their forces from the border. Gaddafi softened his rhetoric against Egypt in the following years, but actively rallied other Arab states to isolate the country. In 1972, Gaddafi created the Islamic Legion as a tool to unify and Arabize the region. The priority of the Legion was first Chad and then Sudan. In Darfur, a western province of Sudan, Gaddafi supported the creation of Tajamu al-Arabi, which according to Gerard Prunier was a militantly racist and pan-Arabist organization which stressed the Arab character of the province. The two organizations shared members and a source of support, and the distinction between them is often ambiguous. This Islamic Legion was mostly composed of immigrants from poorer Sahelian countries, but also, according to a source, thousands of Pakistanis who had been recruited in 1981 with the false promise of civilian jobs once in Libya. Generally speaking, the Legion's members were immigrants who had gone to Libya with no thought of fighting wars, and had been provided with inadequate military training and had sparse commitment. A French journalist, speaking of the Legion's forces in Chad, observed that they were foreigners, Arabs, or Africans, mercenaries in spite of themselves, wretches who had come to Libya hoping for a civilian job, but found themselves signed up more or less by force to go and fight in an unknown desert. At the beginning of the 1987 Libyan offensive in Chad, it maintained a force of 2,000 in Darfur. The nearly continuous cross-border raids that resulted greatly contributed to a separate ethnic conflict within Darfur that killed about 9,000 people between 1985 and 1988. Janjaweed, a group accused by the U.S. of carrying out a genocide in Darfur in the 2000s, emerged in 1988, and some of its leaders are former legionnaires. Attempts at nuclear and chemical weapons. In 1972, Gaddafi tried to buy a nuclear bomb from China. He then tried to get a bomb from Pakistan, but Pakistan severed its ties before it succeeded in building a bomb. In 1978, Gaddafi turned to Pakistan's rival, India, for help building its own nuclear bomb. In July 1978, Libya and India signed a memorandum of understanding to cooperate in peaceful applications of nuclear energy as part of India's Atom of Peace policy. In 1991, then Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif paid a state visit to Libya to hold talks on the promotion of a free trade agreement between Pakistan and Libya. However, Gaddafi focused on demanding Pakistan's prime minister sell him a nuclear weapon, which surprised many of the prime minister's delegation members and journalists. When Prime Minister Sharif refused Gaddafi's demand, Gaddafi disrespected him, calling him a corrupt politician, a term which insulted and surprised Sharif. The prime minister canceled the talks, returned to Pakistan, and expelled the Libyan ambassador to Pakistan. Thailand reported its citizens had helped build storage facilities for nerve gas. Germany sentenced a businessman, Jürgen Hippensteel Imhausen, to 5 years in prison for involvement in Libyan chemical weapons. Inspectors from the Chemical Weapons Convention, CWC, verified in 2004 that Libya owned a stockpile of 23 metric tons of mustard gas and more than 2,300 metric tons of precursor chemicals. Ever wondered how one man could rule a nation for over 4 decades? Let's dive into the complex history of Libya under Muammar Gaddafi. It all started in 1969 when Gaddafi, a young army officer, led a coup that overthrew the monarchy. He established a new system he called Jamahiriya, or State of the Masses, aiming for a unique form of direct democracy. Under his rule, Libya's vast oil wealth funded significant social projects, literacy rates soared, and access to healthcare and housing improved dramatically for many Libyans. However, this era was also marked by strict political control, international isolation, and controversial foreign policies. Gaddafi's long and often tumultuous leadership came to a dramatic end during the Arab Spring in 2011, leaving a legacy that is still debated today. If you found this slice of history interesting, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thanks for watching. Libya and weapons of mass destruction. Libya pursued programs to develop or acquire weapons of mass destruction from when Muammar Gaddafi seized control of Libya in 1969 until he announced on 19 December 2003 that Libya would voluntarily eliminate all materials, equipment, and programs that could lead to internationally prescribed weapons. This included weapons of mass destruction, nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons, and long-range ballistic missiles. Libya under King Idris signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, in 1968, and Gaddafi ratified it in 1975 and concluded a safeguards agreement with the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, in 1980. The United States and the United Kingdom assisted Libya in removing equipment and material from its nuclear weapons program with independent verification by IAEA. In 1982, Libya ratified the Biological Weapons Convention. In 2004, Libya acceded to the Chemical Weapons Convention and declared 24.7 metric tons of mustard gas, 1,390 metric tons of chemical precursors for making sarin, as well as 3,563 unloaded chemical weapon munitions, aerial bombs. The OPCW set January 2014 as the deadline for the full destruction of Libya's chemical weapons. Libya began destroying its chemical stockpiles and munitions later in 2004, but it missed deadlines for converting one chemical weapons production facility to peaceful use and for destroying its stockpile of mustard agent. In October 2014, Libya asked for foreign assistance to transport its 850-ton stockpile of precursor chemicals for making nerve gas out of Libya for destruction. In February 2015, Libyan military sources told the media that unidentified armed men had captured large amounts of Libya's chemical weapons, including mustard gas and sarin. Destruction of Libya's chemical weapon precursors was completed in November 2017. Libya signed the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons on 20th of September 2017, but has not ratified it. Gulf of Sidra incidents and U.S. airstrikes. When Libya was under pressure from international disputes, on 19 August 1981, a naval dogfight occurred over the Gulf of Sirte in the Mediterranean Sea. U.S. F-14 Tomcat jets fired anti-aircraft missiles against a formation of Libyan fighter jets in this dogfight and shot down 2 Libyan Su-22 fighter attack aircraft. This naval action was a result of claiming the territory and losses from the previous incident. A second dogfight occurred on 4th of January 1989. U.S. carrier-based jets also shot down 2 Libyan MiG-23 Flogger-Es in the same place. A similar action occurred on 23 March 1986. While patrolling the Gulf, U.S. naval forces attacked a sizable naval force and various SAM sites, defending Libyan territory. U.S. fighter jets and fighter bombers destroyed SAM launching facilities and sank various naval vessels, killing 35 seamen. This was a reprisal for terrorist hijackings between June and December 1985. On 5 April 1986, Agents' Labelle nightclub in West Berlin was bombed, killing 3 and injuring 229. The plan was intercepted by several national intelligence agencies, and more detailed information was retrieved 4 years later from Stasi archives. The agents who had carried out the operation, who many Western governments claimed to be acting on Gaddafi's orders, were prosecuted by the reunited Germany in the 1990s. In response to the discotheque bombing, joint U.S. Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps airstrikes took place against Libya on 15 April 1986, and codenamed Operation El Dorado Canyon and known as the 1986 bombing of Libya. Air defenses, 3 army bases, and 2 airfields in Tripoli and Benghazi were bombed. The surgical strikes failed to kill Gaddafi, but he lost a few dozen military officers. Gaddafi spread propaganda how it had killed his adopted daughter, and how victims had been all civilians. Despite the variations of the stories, the campaign was successful, and a large proportion of the Western press reported the government's stories as facts. Following the 1986 bombing of Libya, Gaddafi intensified his support for anti-American government organizations. He financed Jeff Fort's Al Rukin faction of the Chicago Black P. Stones gang in their emergence as an indigenous anti-American armed revolutionary movement. Al Rukin members were arrested in 1986 for preparing strikes on behalf of Libya, including blowing up U.S. government buildings and bringing down an airplane. The Al Rukin defendants were convicted in 1987 of offering to commit bombings and assassinations on U.S. soil for Libyan payment. In 1986, Libyan state television announced that Libya was training suicide squads to attack American and European interests. He began financing the IRA again in 1986 to retaliate against the British for harboring American fighter planes. Gaddafi announced that he had won a spectacular military victory over the U.S., and the country was officially renamed the Great Socialist People's Libyan Arab Jamahiriya. However, his speech appeared devoid of passion, and even the victory celebrations appeared unusual. Criticism of Gaddafi by ordinary Libyan citizens became more bold, such as defacing of Gaddafi posters. The raids against the Libyan military had brought the government to its weakest point in 17 years. 1986 United States bombing of Libya. The United States Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps carried out airstrikes, codenamed Operation El Dorado Canyon, against Libya on 15 April 1986 in retaliation for the West Berlin discotheque bombing 10 days earlier, which U.S. President Ronald Reagan blamed on Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi. There were 40 reported Libyan casualties, One U.S. plane was shot down. One of the claimed Libyan deaths was of a baby girl, reported to be Gaddafi's daughter, Hana Gaddafi. However, there are doubts both as to whether she was really killed or even if she truly existed. 2011 Civil War and collapse of Gaddafi's government. A renewed serious threat to the Libyan Arab Jamahiriya came in February 2011 with the 2011 Libyan Revolution. Inspiration for the unrest is attributed to the uprisings in Tunisia and Egypt, connecting it with the wider Arab Spring. In the East, the National Transitional Council was established in Benghazi. The novelist Idris al-Mezmari was arrested hours after giving an interview with Al Jazeera about the police reaction to protests in Benghazi on 15th of February. Many Libyan officials had sided with the protesters and requested help from the international community to bring an end to the massacres of civilians. The government in Tripoli had lost control of half of Libya by the end of February. But as of mid-September, Gaddafi remained in control of several parts of Fezzan. On 21st September, the forces of NTC captured Sabha, the largest city of Fezzan, reducing the control of Gaddafi to limited and isolated areas. Many nations condemned Gaddafi's government over its use of force against civilians. Several other nations allied with Gaddafi, accusing the uprising of being a plot by Western powers to loot Libya's resources. The United Nations Security Council passed a resolution to enforce a no-fly zone over Libyan airspace on 17th of March 2011. The UN resolution authorized airstrikes against Libyan ground troops and warships that threatened civilians. On 19th of March, the no-fly zone enforcement began, with French aircraft undertaking sorties across Libya and a naval blockade by the British Royal Navy. Eventually, the aircraft carriers USS Enterprise and Charles de Gaulle arrived off the coast and provided the enforcers with a rapid response capability. U.S. forces named their part of the enforcement action Operation Odyssey Dawn, meant to deny the Libyan regime from using force against its own people, according to the U.S. Vice Admiral William E. Gortney. More than 110 Tomahawk cruise missiles were fired in an initial assault by U.S. warships and a British submarine against Libyan air defenses. The last government holdouts in Sirte finally fell to anti-Gaddafi fighters on 20th of October 2011, and following the controversial death of Muammar Gaddafi, Libya was officially declared liberated on 23rd October 2011, ending 42 years of Gaddafi's leadership in Libya. Political scientist Riyad Sidawi suggested in October 2011 that Gaddafi has created a great void for his exercise of power. There is no institution, no army, no electoral tradition in the country, and as a result, the period of transition would be difficult in Libya, Africa. Gaddafi was a close supporter of Ugandan President Idi Amin. Gaddafi sent thousands of Libyan troops to fight against Tanzania in the Uganda-Tanzania War on behalf of Idi Amin. About 600 Libyan soldiers lost their lives attempting to defend the collapsing regime of Amin. After the fall of Kampala, Amin was eventually exiled from Uganda to Libya before settling in Saudi Arabia. Gaddafi also aided Jean Bedel Bokassa, the emperor of the Central African Empire. He also intervened militarily in the restored Central African Republic during the 2001 coup attempt to protect his ally, Ange Félix Patassé. Patassé signed a deal giving Libya a 99-year lease to exploit all of that country's natural resources, including uranium, copper, diamonds, and oil. Gaddafi supported Soviet protege Mengistu Haile Mariam of Ethiopia. He also supported the Somali rebel groups SNM and SSDF in their fight to overthrow the dictatorship of Siad Barre. Gaddafi was a strong opponent of apartheid in South Africa and forged a friendship with Nelson Mandela. One of Mandela's grandsons is named Gaddafi, an indication of the latter's support in South Africa. Gaddafi funded Mandela's 1994 election campaign, and after taking office as the country's first democratically elected president in 1994, Mandela rejected entreaties from the U.S. President Bill Clinton and others cut ties with Gaddafi. Mandela later played a key role in helping Gaddafi gain mainstream acceptance in the Western world, later in the 1990s. Over the years, Gaddafi came to be seen as a hero in much of Africa due to his revolutionary image. Gaddafi was a strong supporter of Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe. Gaddafi's World Revolutionary Center, WRC, near Benghazi, became a training center for groups backed by Gaddafi. Graduates in power as of 2011 include Blaise Compaoré of Burkina Faso and Idriss Déby of Chad.